"You're like a brother to me," she said for years. So I introduced her to my new girlfriend. Now, the text message came through at 2:47 a.m., vibrating my phone across the wooden nightstand with an urgency that could only mean one thing. It was Maya, and from the string of typewritten words that followed, I could tell she was either drunk or crying or both. My eyes burned from the blue light as I squinted at the screen, my body still heavy with the sleep I'd finally managed to find after a 16-hour shift at the hospital. The message read, "Marcus, please you pick up. I need you, he's such a jerk. Why do I always fall for these guys?" I sat up in bed, my back against the headboard, and let out a breath that carried 5 years of exhaustion in it. This was the rhythm of our friendship, the predictable metronome that had governed my life since we met in undergrad. Hello friends, before I continue the story, please support the channel by becoming a subscriber and giving the video a like. Also, let us know in the comments where you're watching right now. I called her back because that's what I always did. Her voice came through the speaker, thick with tears and slurred just enough to confirm she'd been drinking wine. The expensive kind she always bought when she was trying to impress whatever new guy had wandered into her orbit. "He said he needed space," she sobbed, her words tumbling over each other like dominoes. "We've been dating for 3 weeks, Marcus, 3 weeks, and he just sends me a text saying he needs to focus on himself." I closed my eyes and felt the familiar weight settle over my shoulders, the invisible cloak of emotional labor I'd been wearing so long I'd forgotten what it felt like to stand without it. "Where are you right now?" I asked, already knowing I'd be getting dressed in the next 5 minutes. She was at the Vine, a trendy wine bar in the Arts District that charged $20 for a glass of Pinot Noir and played jazz so ambient it might as well have been elevator music. I threw on jeans and a hoodie, splashed water on my face, and grabbed my keys from the bowl by the door. The drive took 12 minutes, and I spent every one of them reminding myself that this was what friends did for each other. But somewhere in the back of my mind, in a place I'd been carefully avoiding for years, a small voice asked when she'd ever done this for me. I parked illegally and found her at a corner table, mascara running, surrounded by what looked like 3 empty glasses. "You came," she said, looking up at me with those eyes that had first caught my attention during a sophomore year philosophy seminar. She stood and fell into my arms, and I held her because that's what I'd always done. Her perfume was the same as it had been for years, something French and expensive that her mother sent her for every birthday. I felt her weight against my chest, her tears soaking through my hoodie, and I thought about all the times I'd been this person for her. In that moment, standing in a pretentious wine bar at 3 in the morning, I felt less like a friend and more like a service she subscribed to. I got her home safely, made sure she drank water, and left a bottle of Advil on her nightstand next to a note that said, "Call me when you're up." The drive back to my apartment was quiet, just me and the empty streets and the growing realization that I was tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix. When I finally got back into bed, my phone showed 4:23 a.m., and I had to be up again in 2 hours for rounds. I stared at the ceiling and wondered, not for the first time, when exactly I'd become someone who lived his life in the margins of someone else's story. The thought sat heavy in my chest as I drifted into a shallow, unsatisfying sleep. The pattern had started innocently enough, the way these things always do. Maya and I had been assigned as lab partners in organic chemistry, both of us struggling through the nightmare of memorization and molecular structures. We'd bonded over late-night study sessions, terrible cafeteria coffee, and a shared sense of humor that made the endless hours of academia bearable. She was brilliant and beautiful and chaotic in a way that made everything feel more alive, more vibrant, like someone had turned up the saturation on the world. I'd been drawn to her immediately, not just to her looks but to the energy she brought into every room. By junior year, we were inseparable. She called me her person, her best friend, her rock. All titles I wore with pride, not yet understanding they were also boundaries. I helped her study for the MCAT, listened to her anxieties about her parents' expectations, and celebrated with her when she got into dental school. She was there for my victories too, or at least I told myself she was, showing up to my med school acceptance celebration dinner 40 minutes late because she'd been on a promising first date. I remembered making excuses for her even then, telling myself that real friendship meant understanding that people had their own lives. The first time she called me her brother was during spring break of senior year. We were at her family's lake house, a sprawling property that spoke to the kind of generational wealth I'd only seen in movies growing up in my working-class neighborhood in Detroit. Her actual brother, Christopher, was there with his fiancée, and we were all sitting around a bonfire when her mother asked about us. Maya had laughed, that tinkling sound that I'd once found charming, and said, "Oh, Mom, Marcus is like a brother to me. We're not like that." The words had stung, but I'd smiled and nodded, swallowing the disappointment like bitter medicine. Her mother had looked between us with an expression I couldn't quite read, something like pity, but the moment passed. I told myself it didn't matter. I convinced myself that having her in my life in any capacity was enough, that friendship was actually more valuable than romance, more lasting, more real. These were the lies I built my 20s on, the foundation of sand I pretended was concrete. Every time she said it, and she said it often, wielding the word brother like a shield against any possibility of us, I died a little inside and then resurrected myself with rationalizations. Medical residency consumed the next few years, and in some ways I was grateful for the brutal schedule that left little time for introspection. 80-hour weeks, overnight calls, the constant pressure of life and death decisions. It was exhausting, but it was also clarifying in its demands. Maya had started her dental practice, something cosmetic and upscale in a trendy part of town, and our friendship continued in the spaces between our careers. She'd call during my rare free hours, needing advice about business decisions or apartment hunting or, most frequently, whatever man was currently disappointing her. I showed up every time, reliable as sunrise, steady as a metronome. Her dating life was a carousel of almosts and not quites. There was David, the personal trainer who was too focused on his body. There was James, the lawyer who was too boring and conventional. There was Andre, the artist who was too unreliable and broke. I listened to postmortems of each relationship, offered perspective, validated her feelings, and secretly wondered when she'd see that I was right there, offering everything she claimed to want. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was too stable, too present, too available to ever be considered romantically. I was the control variable in the experiment of her love life, necessary but never the result she was looking for. My own romantic life was nearly non-existent, though I didn't recognize that as a red flag at the time. The few women I dated casually had eventually asked the same question, "What's the deal with you and Maya?" I'd give them the rehearsed answer about how we were just friends, practically family, nothing to worry about. They never believed me, or maybe they believed me but understood something I didn't, that I was emotionally unavailable, already in a relationship with someone who would never reciprocate. The relationships fizzled out, and I told myself it was because of my demanding schedule, not because I was saving all my emotional energy for someone who saw me as a brother. The breaking point came, as these things do, not with a dramatic explosion but with a moment of clarity so sharp it cut through years of self-deception. It was a Thursday evening, and I'd finally gotten a night off, a rare gift in the chaos of my residency. I'd planned to do nothing, absolutely nothing, just order takeout and watch basketball and exist without obligation for a few precious hours. My phone rang at 6:47 p.m., and I actually considered not answering when I saw her name. That hesitation was new, a small crack in the foundation of our dynamic. I answered anyway, old habits being what they are. "Marcus, thank God," Maya said, her voice tight with stress. "I need you to come to Bellamy's right now, please. I'm on a date and it's going so badly and I need an exit strategy." Bellamy's was a restaurant downtown, at least 30 minutes from my apartment in traffic. The request was outrageous in its presumption, in its assumption that my time and my life were perpetually on call for her convenience. Something in me shifted in that moment, a tectonic plate grinding against another after years of pressure. "No," I said, and the word felt foreign in my mouth, like speaking a language I'd never practiced. There was silence on the other end, heavy and confused, because in 5 years I had never denied her anything. "What do you mean, no?" she asked, and I could hear genuine bewilderment in her voice. I took a breath and felt a strange sense of calm wash over me, the peace that comes with finally telling the truth. I mean, I'm not coming, Maya, I said, my voice steady. I'm tired. I finally have a night off. And you're asking me to drive across town to rescue you from a date you chose to go on. I could hear her breathing on the other end, the sound of silverware and conversation in the background of whatever restaurant was the backdrop to her latest romantic misadventure. But you always come, she said, and there was something almost childlike in her confusion. Maybe that's the problem, I replied, and then I did something I'd never done before. I ended the call first. The silence that followed was profound. My phone sat on the coffee table, dark and quiet, and I waited for the guilt to crash over me like a wave. Instead, I felt something else entirely. Relief, clean and pure as spring water. I ordered my Thai food, turned on the game, and for the first time in years, I was fully present in my own life instead of perpetually on standby for hers. The Pistons lost by 12 points, my pad thai was slightly too spicy, and it was one of the best evenings I could remember having. She texted later that night, a series of messages that started with confusion and escalated to accusation. I don't understand why you're being like this. I thought we were best friends. You've never acted this way before. Did I do something wrong? I read them all, these breadcrumbs of manipulation dressed up as hurt feelings, and I realized something profound. She wasn't upset that I wasn't there for her. She was upset that the dynamic had shifted. She'd grown accustomed to a certain version of me, the ever-available emotional support system, and any deviation from that script was perceived as betrayal. I didn't respond that night, and that silence was its own kind of answer. The next few weeks were an education in boundaries I should have learned years earlier. I didn't block her or cut her off dramatically. I simply stopped being available in the ways I'd always been. When she called at inappropriate hours, I let it go to voicemail and called back at my convenience. When she texted with crises that required my immediate intervention, I responded with sympathy but not solutions, certainly not my physical presence. I started saying no, that revolutionary word, and each time I used it, it got a little easier. I was learning, belatedly, that I had been enabling her dependency, that my constant availability had been a disservice to both of us. Maya didn't take well to the new boundaries. She cycled through various strategies to return things to their previous equilibrium. Guilt-tripping, nostalgia for how we used to be, even anger at my abandonment. None of it worked because I'd finally understood a fundamental truth. I had been in love with her for years, and she had been in love with the service I provided. The distinction was everything. She didn't miss me, Marcus the person. She missed Marcus the function, the role I played in supporting her emotional architecture. I threw myself into work and, for the first time, into building a life that was mine alone. I started going to the gym regularly, not as stress relief but as an investment in myself. I reconnected with friends from medical school I'd neglected, guys who wanted to talk about sports and medicine and anything other than relationship drama. I took up cooking, finding unexpected peace in the precision of recipes and the tangible results of my efforts. I was slowly and sometimes painfully becoming a person who existed for himself rather than in orbit around someone else. The hospital became not just a workplace but a community. I'd always been so focused on getting through residency that I'd never really looked around at the people alongside me in the trenches. There was Michael, another resident with a wicked sense of humor who could find comedy in even the worst shifts. There was Dr. Patricia Chun, an attending who became a mentor, teaching me not just about medicine but about maintaining your humanity in a profession that could grind you down. These relationships were different from what I'd had with Maya. They were reciprocal, balanced, based on mutual respect rather than one-sided devotion. It was Dr. Chun who first mentioned her daughter, though not in a matchmaking way. We were reviewing charts during a rare quiet moment in the ICU, and she was telling me about her weekend, how her daughter Keisha had come to visit from her place across town. She's a journalist, Dr. Chun said, pride evident in her voice. Just got a staff position at the Tribune, covering healthcare policy. I nodded politely, not thinking much of it beyond being happy for her obvious maternal pride. The conversation moved on to a patient's labs, and I didn't give it another thought. The official introduction happened at the hospital's annual charity gala, an event I'd skipped in previous years because Maya always seemed to have some crisis that coincidentally occurred on the same evening. This year, I bought a ticket and a new suit, and I showed up alone with no intention other than supporting a good cause and maybe having one decent glass of whiskey. The hotel ballroom was done up in the standard gala fashion. Too many flowers, too little lighting, a live band playing jazz that was meant to sound sophisticated. I was making small talk with a group of nurses when Dr. Chan appeared at my elbow with a woman who had her mother's intelligent eyes and a smile that was entirely her own. "Marcus, this is my daughter, Keisha," Dr. Chan said, and there was a knowing look in her eyes that suggested this meeting wasn't quite as accidental as she was pretending. Keisha extended her hand, her grip firm and confident. "The resident my mother won't stop talking about," she said, her tone warm and teasing. "She's told me you're either the second coming of Hippocrates or she's trying to set us up." I laughed, appreciating the directness. "Probably somewhere in between," I said, shaking her hand and feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Genuine, uncomplicated interest in getting to know someone new. We talked for 20 minutes that became an hour, our conversation flowing with an ease I'd forgotten was possible. Keisha was brilliant and funny, with a sharp wit and an obvious passion for her work exposing inequities in healthcare access. She asked me about my research on hypertension in Black communities, actually listened to my answer, and asked follow-up questions that showed she understood the implications. When I asked about her work, she lit up, describing an investigative piece she was working on about maternal mortality rates. There was a balance to it, a give and take, neither of us performing or posturing but just genuinely engaged. It felt revolutionary. "I should probably let you get back to mingling," Keisha said eventually, though she didn't sound like she particularly wanted the conversation to end. Dr. Chun had long since drifted away with a satisfied smile that she probably thought was subtle. "Or," I said, surprising myself with my boldness, "we could continue this conversation over coffee sometime, if you're interested." She smiled, and it was a smile that reached her eyes, transforming her whole face. "I'd like that," she said, pulling out her phone. We exchanged numbers, and I felt a flutter of something I'd thought I'd lost the capacity for. Hope, genuine and uncomplicated by years of unrequited longing. Our first date was at a small Ethiopian restaurant in her neighborhood, a place with mismatched chairs and the best Doro what I'd ever tasted. We shared the combination platter, our hands occasionally brushing as we reached for the injera, and every touch felt electric in a way that was entirely new to me. Keisha told me about growing up as a doctor's daughter, the pressure and privilege of it, how she'd deliberately chosen journalism to forge her own path. I told her about Detroit, about my mother who'd worked 2 jobs to get me through undergrad, about the responsibility I felt to make it all mean something. She didn't try to fix anything or offer platitudes. She just listened with an attention that felt like a gift. "So what's your baggage?" she asked over coffee, her directness cutting through the usual first date pretense. "Everyone our age has baggage. Might as well lay it out now." I appreciated the question, the refusal to pretend we were blank slates. "I spent the last 5 years in love with my best friend who saw me as a brother," I said, the words coming easier than I'd expected. "I finally walked away a few months ago, and I'm still figuring out who I am when I'm not defined by that." Keisha nodded, no judgment in her expression, just understanding. "That's honest," she said. "I appreciate honest." She told me about her ex-fiancé, a relationship that had ended when she realized she was more in love with the idea of him than the reality. "We looked perfect on paper," she said, stirring her coffee absently. "Both ambitious, similar backgrounds. Our mothers were already planning the wedding, but I couldn't shake this feeling that I was playing a role instead of living my life." I understood exactly what she meant, that sense of performing a script written by someone else's expectations. We sat in that restaurant until they started stacking chairs around us, neither of us wanting the evening to end. When we finally left, she let me walk her to her car, and she kissed me on the cheek before leaving, a promise of possibility. The relationship developed with a natural momentum that felt entirely different from the tortured calculus of my friendship with Maya. Keisha was busy with her work and I with mine, but we made time for each other in ways that felt intentional rather than obligatory. She didn't need me to rescue her or fix her problems. She had her life together and was simply inviting me to be part of it. When she had a bad day, She told me about it, but she wasn't looking for me to solve it, just to listen and be present. It was partnership instead of parenthood, and the difference was profound. I met her friends at a dinner party in a brownstone in Bronzeville, a gathering of journalists and activists and artists who welcomed me with a warmth that wasn't about what I could do for them. They asked about my work with genuine interest, included me in conversations about politics and culture, and treated Keisha with an obvious respect and affection that told me everything about who she was. I watched her in her element, brilliant and passionate and fully herself, and felt grateful to be witness to it. On the drive home, she asked what I thought, and I told her the truth. I think you have really good people around you. She squeezed my hand and said, now they're around you too. 3 months into dating, I was happier than I could remember being, living in the present instead of mourning what I couldn't have. My work was fulfilling, my relationship was healthy, and I'd built a life that felt authentic rather than reactive. I'd nearly forgotten about Maya, or at least she'd receded from the central role she'd occupied in my consciousness for so long. Then Dr. Chan mentioned the upcoming residence celebration, a quarterly gathering where we were encouraged to bring partners and friends for an evening of food and forced socialization. You should bring Keisha, she said, that knowing smile back on her face. I'd like to see you two together outside of me engineering your meetings. I asked Keisha that evening over dinner at my place, my apartment that no longer felt like just a place to sleep between shifts. She was helping me chop vegetables for a stir-fry, moving around my kitchen with a comfort that made my chest tighten with affection. There's this thing at the hospital next month, I said, trying for casual. It's pretty low-key, just residents and attendings and whoever we want to bring. Would you want to come? She looked up from the cutting board, a piece of bell pepper still on her knife. Are you asking me to meet your work family? She asked, her tone teasing but her eyes serious. I guess I am, I said, and she smiled. Then yes, I'd love to. The celebration was at Morgan's, a restaurant with good food and a private room that the hospital rented out for these occasions. Keisha wore a burgundy dress that made her look stunning, and I couldn't stop looking at her as we walked in together. My colleagues greeted us warmly, and I introduced her around, feeling a pride I'd never experienced in my relationship with Maya. Not pride in possessing some trophy, but pride in being chosen by someone remarkable. She charmed everyone, asking Dr. Patterson about his research and laughing at Michael's terrible jokes, fitting seamlessly into this part of my life. I felt whole in a way I'd never experienced, like all the pieces of myself were finally in the same room. I was getting drinks from the bar when I heard her voice. Marcus. I turned and there was Maya, standing in the entrance of the private room looking as confused as I felt. She was wearing a black cocktail dress and heels that added 3 inches to her height. Her hair in the loose curls she knew looked best. What are you doing here? I asked, genuinely perplexed about how she'd ended up at a hospital event. She gestured vaguely toward a guy in a suit I vaguely recognized from radiology. I'm here with Brett. We've been seeing each other for a few weeks. He said it was fine to bring someone. Her eyes scanned the room and landed on Keisha, who was laughing at something Dr. Chan had said, and I saw the calculation happen in real time. Is that your date? Maya asked, and there was something sharp in her voice I'd never heard directed at me before. I looked at Keisha, at this woman who'd brought joy and balance into my life, and felt a clarity that was almost aggressive in its certainty. That's my girlfriend, I said, the word feeling powerful and true. Keisha. She's a journalist. Her mother's one of the attendings here. Maya's face did something complicated, cycling through emotions too quickly to name. Girlfriend, she repeated, like the word was foreign. Wow, that's great, Marcus. I'm really happy for you. The lie was obvious, transparent as glass, but I didn't call it out. Thanks, I said simply. Let me introduce you. I walked over to Keisha, who looked up at me with an open, trusting expression that made my heart squeeze. Keisha, this is Maya, an old friend from college, I said, my hand finding the small of Keisha's back. Maya, this is Keisha Chen. They shook hands, Keisha warm and gracious, Maya performing friendliness while her eyes stayed cold and assessing. Marcus and I go way back, Maya said, her voice carrying an implication, a claim of territory. He's like a brother to me. There it was, that word she'd used as a weapon for years, now deployed to establish her historical primacy. But instead of the old sting, I felt nothing but a mild amusement at the transparency of it. That's nice that you've stayed friends, Keisha said, her hand finding mine and squeezing gently, a gesture of support and solidarity. Marcus has told me about his college days. The implication was clear. I'd told her, which meant she was in my confidence, which meant Maya's historical claim meant less than Keisha's present reality. The power dynamic I'd lived under for years had completely inverted, and Maya felt it like a physical blow. The rest of the evening was excruciating for Maya and revelatory for me. I watched her watch us, saw her register every touch, every private smile, every moment of intimacy between Keisha and me. She kept trying to insert herself into conversations, to remind me of shared memories, to reestablish the connection we'd once had. Remember that time we stayed up all night studying for biochem and ended up watching the sunrise? She asked at one point, her voice bright and false. That was a long time ago, I said, not unkindly but firmly. Keisha and I just watched the sunrise last weekend after I got off a night shift. It was beautiful. The comparison was deliberate, a way of saying what we had is past, what I have now is present and better. Maya's Brett seemed oblivious to the undercurrent, chatting happily with colleagues about hospital politics and sports. But Maya was hemorrhaging, and part of me, the part that had loved her for years, felt a pang of sympathy even as the rest of me recognized this was a wound of her own making. She'd had years to see me, really see me, and she'd chosen not to until I was no longer available. That wasn't my responsibility to fix. Keisha and I left early, both of us claiming early mornings, though really we just wanted to be alone together. In the car, she was quiet for a few minutes before asking, "So that was her?" I didn't insult her intelligence by pretending not to understand. "Yeah," I said, "that was her." Keisha nodded, looking out the window at the city lights streaming past. "She's still in love with the idea of having you available," she observed, her journalist's eye cutting to the truth. "But you're not available anymore." I reached over and took her hand, feeling grateful for her clarity, her confidence, her complete lack of insecurity about something that would have derailed a lesser relationship. The text messages started the next day, as I'd known they would. Maya had never been good at sitting with uncomfortable feelings. She needed to process them out loud, preferably with me as her audience. "It was so good to see you last night," the first one read, artificially bright. "We should grab coffee and catch up properly. It's been too long." I read it during a brief break between patients and felt nothing but a mild fatigue at the predictability of it. I didn't respond immediately, and in that gap, I could imagine her anxiety growing, the unfamiliar sensation of my attention being elsewhere. The messages escalated over the next few days, following a pattern I recognized from observing her relationships implode. First came the casual invitations to reconnect, each one a little more insistent than the last. Then came the nostalgia, carefully curated memories designed to remind me of our history, our special connection. I was going through old photos and found that one of us at the lake house. We looked so happy. Remember how simple everything was then? I did remember, but I remembered it differently now. I remembered being in love while she was oblivious, remembered making myself small to fit her definition of friendship, remembered years of hoping she'd see me differently. When the casual and nostalgic approaches didn't work, her messages turned more vulnerable, more raw. "I miss my best friend," she wrote late on a Tuesday night. "I feel like I lost you and I don't even know why. Can we please just talk?" The manipulation of it was obvious to me now. The way she framed herself as the victim of my unexplained withdrawal rather than acknowledging years of taking me for granted. I showed the message to Keisha, who'd become my sounding board on the Maya situation. "What do you want to do?" she asked, no judgment in her voice, just curiosity. I thought about it, really thought about it, and realized I wanted to do nothing at all. "I don't owe her an explanation," I said, the words feeling like freedom. "I don't owe her my time or energy or emotional labor anymore." Keisha nodded, a small smile on her face. "No, you don't," she agreed. "But you already knew that, didn't you?" I did know it, but saying it out loud to someone who supported my boundaries rather than pushed against them made it real in a new way. I didn't block Maya, that felt too dramatic, too much like she still had power over my emotional state, but I did mute her notifications and stop responding with any urgency. The final message in that particular wave came 2 weeks later, and it was the most honest thing Maya had said to me in years. "I see you with her and I realize what I lost," she wrote. "I took you for granted, Marcus. I see that now. I was scared of how much you meant to me, so I made you safe by calling you my brother. But you were never my brother, you were everything, and I'm so sorry." I read it sitting in my apartment on a Saturday morning, coffee in hand, sunlight streaming through the windows. It was the confession I'd wanted for years, the acknowledgement I dreamed of hearing, and I felt absolutely nothing. That was when I knew I was truly free. Her words had no power because they'd come too late, after I'd already rebuilt my life without her at the center. She was apologizing for losing something she'd never actually valued until it was gone, and I'd finally learned the difference between being someone's priority and being their option. I thought about responding, about acknowledging her honesty, but ultimately I decided that silence was its own kind of answer. She'd made me invisible for years. Now I was returning the favor. Life moved forward with a momentum that felt right. Keisha and I became official, whatever that meant in your 30s. We met each other's families, integrated our friend groups, started talking about future plans with the kind of casual certainty that comes from knowing you're building something real. Her mother beamed whenever she saw us together, clearly thrilled her matchmaking had worked out. My own mother, when I brought Keisha home to Detroit for a weekend, pulled me aside and said, "This one sees you, baby. I can tell. She really sees you." It was the blessing I hadn't known I needed. Work continued to be demanding but fulfilling, and I found I was better at it now that I wasn't constantly distracted by Maya's drama. My research was progressing, my patient outcomes were strong, and I was being considered for a chief resident position. Dr. Chun, my mentor and now kind of my mother-in-law in waiting, told me I seemed different, more centered. "You were always competent," she said, "but now you're confident. There's a difference." I knew what the difference was. I was finally living for myself instead of for someone who'd never really seen me. The real confrontation, when it came, happened at the most mundane location imaginable: the produce section of Whole Foods on a Sunday afternoon. Keisha and I were debating the merits of different varieties of apples, her arguing for Honeycrisp while I made the case for Pink Lady. When I heard my name, I turned and there was Maya, her shopping cart empty except for a bottle of wine and a frozen pizza, looking like she'd either just woken up or hadn't slept in days. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her hair in a messy bun, all the performative polish gone. "Marcus," she said again, and there was something desperate in her voice. "Please, can we talk?" Keisha touched my arm gently. "I'll go grab the cheese we need," she said, her voice quiet, giving me space but also making clear she wasn't going far. I appreciated the balance of it, the trust implicit in stepping away while also maintaining her presence. I turned to Maya fully, my cart a physical barrier between us. "What's going on, Maya?" I asked, not unkindly but not with the automatic sympathy I would have offered 6 months ago. She looked at me, at my cart with its evidence of domestic partnership, the ingredients for a meal Keisha and I were cooking together, the specific brand of coffee she liked, the fresh flowers I bought her every week, and something in her crumbled. "I made a huge mistake," she said, words tumbling out fast like she was afraid I'd walk away before she finished. "The biggest mistake of my life. I took you for granted for years. I was scared of what we could be because it was so real. Everyone else was just a distraction from what I really wanted, which was you." Tears started streaming down her face, and she made no move to wipe them away. "I love you, Marcus. I'm in love with you. I think I always have been, but I was too scared to admit it. But seeing you with her made me realize what an idiot I've been. Please, can we just talk about this?" It was the confession I dreamed of hearing for 5 years, and I felt nothing but a distant, clinical pity. "Maya," I said gently, the way you'd speak to a patient receiving bad news. "I appreciate you being honest, I really do, but I'm with Keisha now and I'm happy, genuinely happy in a way I never was when I was waiting for you to see me." She shook her head, rejecting my words before I'd even finished. "But we have history," she protested. 5 years of friendship, that has to mean something. You can't just throw that away for someone you've known for a few months. I saw it then, the fundamental misunderstanding that had always been at the heart of our relationship. She valued time invested over quality of connection, history over happiness. The history we have is important to me, I said, choosing my words carefully. But that history is also why this can't work. For years you had me available, emotionally and physically and in every way that mattered, and you chose to keep me at a distance. You chose to call me your brother while you chased after guys who treated you like an option. I saw her flinch, but I continued because she needed to hear this. I'm not angry about that anymore. You weren't obligated to return my feelings. But I'm also not obligated to put my life on hold now that it's suddenly convenient for you to want what I've always offered. The words were firm but not cruel, boundaries stated clearly rather than weaponized. So that's it? She asked, her voice breaking. You're just done with me? With us? With everything we've been to each other? I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not the idealized figure I'd built up in my mind for years but a real person with real flaws who'd made real mistakes. I'm not done with you, I said quietly. I genuinely hope you find what you're looking for, Maya. I hope you heal and grow and find someone who makes you happy, but I can't be the person you call at 3 a.m. anymore. I can't be your emotional support system while you figure your life out. I need to build my own life now. She started to speak, to protest or plead or bargain, but I held up my hand gently. I care about you, I said, and it was true in a way that was finally free of longing. I always will, but as a friend, a real friend, not whatever codependent thing we had before, and real friends want the best for each other even when that means stepping back. I paused, letting the finality of it settle. I hope you take care of yourself, I really do, but I can't be the one taking care of you anymore. The words hung in the air between us, gentle but absolute, a door closing softly but completely. I saw Keisha approaching in my peripheral vision, her timing impeccable, giving me enough time but also providing an exit. She came and stood beside me, her hand finding mine naturally, effortlessly. Everything okay? She asked, her eyes moving between Maya and me with concern but not insecurity. I looked at this woman who'd brought light and partnership and reciprocal love into my life, and I felt a gratitude so profound it almost hurt. Yeah, I said, squeezing her hand. Everything's good. I looked back at Maya one last time. Take care of yourself, okay? I said, and I meant it without any hidden agenda or hope for reconciliation. She stood there, tears still streaming, looking lost in a way that would have destroyed me 6 months ago. Now I felt compassion but not responsibility, sympathy but not the need to fix. Goodbye, Maya, I said softly, and then I turned away, my hand in Keisha's, and we walked toward the checkout together. I didn't look back. I didn't need to, because everything I needed was walking beside me, holding my hand, planning our dinner, being present in her own life and inviting me to be part of it. As we loaded groceries onto the conveyor belt, Keisha leaned against me briefly, a casual gesture of affection and solidarity. You okay? She asked quietly. I thought about it, really checked in with myself and found that I was more than okay. Yeah, I said, and I meant it completely. I really am. The cashier was a middle-aged black woman with kind eyes who smiled at us as she rang up our items. She glanced at the flowers, the wine, the ingredients for the pasta dish we were making, and said, "Y'all look happy, that's beautiful to see." Keisha grinned and squeezed my hand. We are, she said simply, and the truth of it was undeniable. I paid for our groceries, we walked out into the bright afternoon, and I realized that for the first time in 5 years, I wasn't haunted by what could have been because I was living in what actually was. The drive home was quiet but comfortable, the kind of silence that comes from being at ease with someone rather than having nothing to say. Keisha had her hand on my knee, a casual possessiveness that made me smile. That was her, wasn't it? She asked, not needing confirmation but asking anyway. The one you spent 5 years loving. I nodded, keeping my eyes on the road. Yeah, I said. That was her. And? Keisha asked, her voice curious but not worried. I thought about how to answer, how to put into words the complicated simplicity of what I felt. And I realized I spent 5 years in love with an idea. I said slowly. An idea of who she could be, what we could be together, but the reality was I was just convenient. I was the foundation she stood on while looking for something she thought was better. I glanced at Keisha, at this woman who met me as an equal, who chose me actively rather than keeping me as a backup. What we have is real, I said. It's reciprocal and honest, and I don't have to perform or prove or beg for your attention. And that's what I actually want. She smiled, that full-face smile that made my heart skip. Good, she said, because I'm not letting you go. We got back to my apartment and cooked together, a dance we'd perfected over the past months, moving around each other with an easy synchronicity. Music played from her phone, something jazzy and upbeat, and she sang along while chopping garlic. I watched her and felt a contentment that was profound in its ordinariness. This was what partnership looked like, this easy collaboration, this shared domesticity. This was what I'd been looking for in all those years of waiting for Maya to see me. Over dinner, Keisha told me about her current investigation, a piece about hospital billing practices that was getting pushback from administrators. I listened, asked questions, offered perspective from my side of healthcare, and we debated the ethics and economics of it all. She challenged my assumptions and I challenged hers, and the conversation was intellectually stimulating and emotionally safe. I thought, this is what I deserve. Not someone I have to rescue or fix or wait for, but someone who shows up fully and expects the same from me. I'm proud of you, Keisha said later as we were cleaning up, her words seemingly out of nowhere. I looked at her, confused. For what? She put down the dish she was washing and turned to face me fully. For choosing yourself, she said simply. For walking away from something that wasn't serving you, even though it was familiar, even though it was hard. That takes courage. Her words settled something in me, a validation I hadn't known I needed. I'm proud of me too, I said, and for the first time I really was. The weeks that followed were blissfully Maya-free, her silence suggesting she'd finally accepted what I told her. I threw myself into my life, work, Keisha, friends, hobbies I'd neglected for years. I started playing basketball again with guys from the hospital, rediscovering the joy of moving my body for fun rather than obligation. I read books that had nothing to do with medicine, novels and history and philosophy that exercised different parts of my brain. I was, belatedly but genuinely, becoming a full person rather than a supporting character in someone else's story. Keisha and I hit the 6-month mark and celebrated with a weekend trip to a cabin upstate. Nothing fancy but perfect in its simplicity. We hiked and cooked and talked and made love and existed in a bubble of partnership that felt revolutionary in its ease. On the last night, sitting on the porch under a sky full of stars I never saw in the city, she asked, "Where do you see this going?" It was a fair question, and I didn't have to think long about my answer. "Wherever we build it," I said. "I see us building something together as equals, as partners, and I see that being my future if you want it to be." She kissed me then, soft and deep and full of promise. The Maya situation had one final chapter, though I didn't know it was coming. I was at a medical conference downtown, presenting my research on community health interventions, when I saw her in the crowd. She looked better than she had in Whole Foods, put together, professional, like she'd regained some equilibrium. During the break, she approached me, her manner careful, uncertain. "Marcus," she said, "your presentation was really impressive. Your work is important." I thanked her, keeping my tone professional but not cold. "How have you been, Maya?" I asked, and I genuinely wanted to know. "I've been better," she admitted, and there was a rawness to it that seemed real rather than performative. "I've actually started therapy, working through some stuff about why I sabotage good things in my life." I felt a genuine gladness for her. "That's great, Maya. Really, self-awareness is huge." We stood there in the conference lobby, former best friends now essentially strangers, and the silence wasn't comfortable but it wasn't hostile either. Finally, she spoke. "I wanted to apologize," she said quietly. "Not to get you back or change anything, just to actually say I'm sorry for how I treated you. You deserved better than what I gave you." The apology landed differently than it would have months ago. Then, I would have been waiting for it, hoping for it, ready to accept it as a down payment on reconciliation. Now, it was just words, appreciated but not needed for my healing. I appreciate that, I said honestly, and I forgive you, not because you need my forgiveness to move on, but because holding on to anger wasn't serving me. She nodded, tears gathering in her eyes but not falling. You seem happy, she observed. With Keisha. I smiled, genuine and unguarded. Yeah, I said. I really am. Good, Maya said, and I believed she meant it. You deserve that. I know I didn't see you the way you deserve to be seen, but I see it now, and I'm glad you found someone who sees it too. It was the blessing I hadn't known I needed. Not permission but acknowledgement. A closing of the circle. We parted ways cordially, and I felt lighter, like some final weight I'd been carrying had dissolved. She'd been a huge part of my life, and now she was part of my past, and both those things could be true without conflict. I texted Keisha about the encounter, needing to share it with her. Ran into Maya at the conference. She apologized. It was actually okay. Feeling good about it. Her response came quickly. I'm glad you got closure. See you tonight. Love you. That love you stopped me in my tracks. We'd been dancing around those words for weeks, both of us feeling it but neither quite brave enough to say it first. I typed back without hesitation. Love you too. See you soon. The words felt revolutionary, not because they were new but because they were uncomplicated, freely given and received without games or conditions. That evening, I told Keisha the full story of my conversation with Maya, holding nothing back. She listened without interruption, her hand in mine, occasionally squeezing my fingers in support or solidarity. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment before speaking. How do you feel? She asked. I considered the question seriously. Free, I said finally. I feel free. Like I've been carrying this weight for so long I forgot what it felt like to stand without it. And now I remember. She smiled and kissed me softly. Good, she said. Because you deserve to be free, you deserve to be chosen. And I choose you every single day. 6 months later, I ran into them at a restaurant, purely by chance. Maya was with a guy who looked attentive and kind, and they were laughing together in a way that seemed genuine. She saw me and waved. Nothing dramatic, just a simple acknowledgement. I waved back, and that was the entirety of our interaction. Keisha was in the bathroom when it happened, and when she returned, I told her. That's nice, she said, meaning it. Everyone deserves a chance at happiness. I agreed, and I meant it too because I'd found mine. The proposal happened on a random Tuesday, nothing elaborate or Instagram-worthy. Just the two of us in my apartment after she'd worked late on a story and I'd had a brutal shift. We were eating takeout on the couch, her feet in my lap, and I looked at her. Exhausted, beautiful, present, real, and I knew. Marry me, I said. Not a question but a statement of intent. She looked up from her lo mein, chopsticks frozen halfway to her mouth. Seriously? She asked. Seriously, I confirmed. I don't have a ring yet, and this isn't romantic, but I know I want to build a life with you, officially and permanently. So yes, seriously, marry me. She put down the takeout container and climbed into my lap, her hands framing my face. Yes, she said, laughing and crying at the same time. Obviously yes, you brilliant, wonderful man, yes. We kissed and laughed, and she called her mother right there at midnight because she couldn't wait, and Dr. Chen's delighted scream could be heard without the phone even on speaker. It was messy and imperfect and absolutely perfect, a proposal that was entirely us, built on the foundation of who we actually were rather than who we thought we should be. The wedding was small, just family and close friends, nothing elaborate because neither of us wanted that. My mother cried through the entire ceremony, and Dr. Chun beamed with pride, and my boys from the hospital gave the most embarrassing toasts imaginable. Keisha looked stunning in a simple dress that cost less than Maya used to spend on shoes, and I knew I was the luckiest man alive. During our first dance, she whispered, "Thank you for choosing yourself so you could choose me." I held her closer and said, "Thank you for making me worth choosing." I never saw Maya at the wedding, and I never expected to. She wasn't part of this chapter of my life, and that was okay. She'd played a role in my story, teaching me what I didn't want, what I wouldn't settle for, and in a strange way I was grateful for that. The years I'd spent loving her had taught me to recognize real love when it appeared, to appreciate partnership over performance, to choose presence over potential. Those lessons had value even if the relationship hadn't. Now, 2 years into marriage, I sometimes think about that version of myself who waited by the phone at 2 a.m., who dropped everything for someone who saw him as a brother. I feel compassion for him, that younger Marcus who didn't know his worth, who thought love meant self-sacrifice rather than mutual support. I want to tell him it gets better, that he deserves better, that one day he'll meet someone who sees him fully and chooses him completely. But he had to learn that himself, through the pain and the walking away and the choosing himself. Keisha is in the kitchen now, making breakfast and singing off-key to the radio. I'm sitting at our table in our apartment, drinking coffee and writing this all down because someone suggested sharing it might help others in similar situations. The morning light is gentle, the coffee is strong, and in a few minutes, I'll go kiss my wife and start our day together. This is the life I built on the other side of walking away, and it's more than I ever imagined. If you're reading this and you're the person who's always available, always supportive, always there for someone who calls you their sibling while you're in love with them, I see you. Your feelings are valid, your hurt is real, and you deserve better than breadcrumbs and late-night crisis calls. You deserve someone who chooses you first, who sees your value, who doesn't need a crisis to remember you exist. And the only way to find that person is to stop being available to someone who doesn't value your presence. The scary, walking away from the familiar even when the familiar is hurting you. It's terrifying to let go of potential and what-ifs and the person you've built your life around. But on the other side of that fear is freedom. Freedom to build a life that's yours, to pursue relationships that are reciprocal, to discover who you are when you're not defined by someone else's needs. And that freedom is worth every moment of discomfort, every hard conversation, every night of wondering if you made the right choice. You did make the right choice. You will make the right choice. And one day you'll be sitting at your own table, drinking your own coffee, listening to your own person sing off-key in the kitchen, and you'll be grateful you chose yourself. Because choosing yourself is the first step to building a life worth living, and everyone deserves that chance. Thank you for watching all the way through. There's another story to your left screen. You'll enjoy it more than this one.